Hey guys, I have another video for you here, and this one is on the Polaris Corvette. Now, let's have a look here at what the Q&A is. So, here we go. Does the Polaris come with a snub craft already? Can you provide a list of ships that the Polaris can fit in its hold? What is the biggest ship that it can fit? Is it possible to fit two smaller ships like Merlin's? No snub craft is included with the Polaris, and this is mainly due to the fact that the hangar is designed with a small fighter in mind. Obviously though, there is nothing stopping you from using this to house a snub craft if you wish. And in theory, yes, anything smaller than a Sabre could fit, so two Merlins could be able to fit with some very precise landing. The Polaris uses torpedoes. Can you tell us how torpedo combat will work? How will we use torpedoes in Star Citizen? Torpedoes will essentially have the same gameplay functionality as missiles, with the Retaliator being an example. The main difference will be the properties of the torpedo itself. Being a larger scale, you can expect it to have a lower top speed and maneuverability, but packing more damage per hit on a larger radius. Just as with missiles, other properties will vary as well, including lock time, reliability, and countermeasure resistance depending on the make and model of the torpedo, along with the quality of the launching ship's avionics. Torpedoes are generally intended for use against large targets like capital ships or installations. While you could theoretically use them against smaller ship like a fighter, bomber, or utility ship, they're much easier for those small ships to evade without using the use of countermeasures. So basically what I'm trying to say here is, the smaller ships can quite literally dodge out the way of them because they're not as maneuverable. That's what I'm getting from this section of the Q&A. How long is it? The pre-sale page has it listed for 155 meters, as does the brochure, but the stats page has it listed for 130 meters. We can confirm that the Polaris is 155 meters long. The stats page has been adjusted accordingly. What types of ships do you intend the Polaris to be strong against? What should it be weakest against? Generally speaking, the Polaris is an ideal ship for taking on smaller, medium-sized capital ships, and typically should be used to get in quick, deliver the torpedo payload, and get out. The turrets will also be utilized to fend off any small fighters who attempt to make chase. The torpedoes can also inflict significant damage against larger scale capital ships, and provide enough firepower to crack fortifications for powerful static defenses. Think sieges or base attacks. The question as to exactly how much is a matter of game balance and something we'll be exploring together over time. It's a ship designed for dedicated to combat, like faster than larger capital ships and tougher than smaller ships, and as such, like any ship, it will perform better or worse depending on whether you appreciate its characteristics and employ them accordingly. For example, the Polaris may find itself the target of torpedoes and large caliber ship guns, going toe to toe with a destroyer or cruiser, and staying exposed to its guns for extended periods of time is not the best way to use this ship. On the plus side, being a capital ship, the Polaris static defenses make it difficult to greatly harm with fighter scale weapons. Between its shields, armor, turrets, fighters will be hard pressed to do much damage to the Polaris without suffering severe consequences themselves. However, watch out for gladiators and bombers. Do you envision the Polaris to have any roles or uses outside combat? Due to its speed, the Polaris is first and foremost a military ship, so its design is based around combat scenarios. It is ideal as a patrol ship or as a lead ship for capital ship fleet. That said, as with most other ships, there is nothing stopping anyone from using it for cargo runs or general transportation. Bear in mind that in the real world, warships generally don't make money. They're incredibly expensive and represent a massive drain on the resources of the nation that fields them. They pay for themselves by projecting influence and providing a deterrence for the nation that operates it, making the area safer for maritime and commercial activity that otherwise wouldn't be safe or practical for the benefit of that nation's economy, as well as providing strength in negotiations with other countries. Star Citizen is of course meant to be a game, and we don't intend to make the cost of operating capital ships as prohibitive to players as it would be in real life. They're attainable and we want you to have fun with them. It does mean, however, that you don't deploy or use capital ships, even Corvettes, as usually as you would an Aurora, Starfarer, or other personal scale ship. You can tool around space on a whim and cover your operating expenses with casual profits. Corvette captains, like large merchant captains, are on a mission, not just sightseeing, and want to plan their itineraries intelligently. Large squadrons or organizations might use these capital ships innocuously, pretty sure I pronounced that wrong, but I'm trying here folks, to how real-world nations use theirs, to enable freer transit for allied shipping by their very presence, provide leverage or a show of force in negotiations or standoffs against other large entities, or crack heavy installations. Large numbers of hostile fighters or bombers usually still need some sort of large base or mothership to operate from to refuel and repair. After all, independent operators can provide those services to other entities for a fee as well, although this goes beyond the standard kind of escort mission. While you can use the Polaris for straightforward cargo runs or general transportation, in many cases it isn't going to be anywhere near as, cost effective or as lucrative as using a hull series or any other kind of ship like that instead, unless it's a valuable cargo and you're getting a premium for armored security. As with most ships, we want to provide you with a lot of freedom in your choices. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be paying attention to whether your ship is reasonably appropriate for the job you have in mind. How viable will it be to run a Polaris solo or with AI crew? In a combat scenario, you will absolutely need a crew of some form to stand much of a chance. The main firepower comes from the torpedo launch room, which has a station for dedicated weapons officer. You can hire AI crew to man the stations, and bear in mind that they are not free and come with varying levels of skill. It's generally not recommended to attempt to operate a capital ship with a skeleton crew if you expect to get into combat. Think about the USS Enterprise in Star Trek 3. She typically operates with a crew of over 400. The crew of just 5 people can fly the Enterprise somewhere, but without the proper crew, she is punching far below her weight in battle. Generally speaking, you'll want to bring friends, hire AI crew, or both, because while you can operate with a skeleton crew, that doesn't mean it's a good idea. Can the Polaris land like the Idris? If so, is it capable of carrying and deploying a rover? The Polaris can indeed land, and has a landing gear built in. And while the rover specs are not yet finalized, while the Polaris is being designed, the cargo hold should be large enough to house the rover without any issues. Why are there so many crew positions? What is there to do on the Polaris when you're not the person flying it? Generally speaking, the Polaris can indeed run with less than the maximum crew advertised. This is mainly because you generally would not expect crew members to work their stations 24 hours a day, and would, take the helm or man their stations in shifts. Therefore, the maximum crew advertised usually outnumbers the number of onboard stations. You can, of course, fill up to the maximum crew complement if you wish with jobs like extra security personnel or mercs. And we also incorporate enough space to provide quarters for the crew members of the fighter or support ships stored in the hangar. The shields listed for the Idris and Javelin read capital, while the shields for the Polaris read large. Difference and why the Polaris has large instead of capital shields. In short, the Polaris shields are not as strong as those found on the Idris and Javelin, but this is a trade-off in return for its relative speed and firepower. Also, in terms of scale, both the Javelin and Idris are quite a lot larger than the Polaris. It's also worth remembering that the shields need to be placed in context of their deployment. The Idris and Javelin are both larger and slower, and so generally they are going to be exposed to more concentrated fire more often and more frequently than a Polaris, especially perhaps by capital size weaponry. When ships are designed with actual components taking up internal volume, you can't just fit supersized everything in the hull. So just as with real-world engineers designing warships, often you try to find an efficient and effective balance of equipment and bulk. Shields also require power from the power plants in order to work, so you might get better results from running a smaller shield generator with peak efficiency rather than a large shield generator with only little juice. Since the Corvette is smaller than a large class capital ship, You can't just pound for pound put the same reactors, avionics, etc. as a larger ship across the board without bloating the design. Can we land in the hangar without raising the platform and vice versa? When landing in the hammer platform, will a pilot have to match the Polaris' current speed in order to not be crushed? Will it be possible to take off while the ship is moving? In theory, yes, you can land inside without the platform being raised, but some ships will encounter issues with this, the Sabre being an example, as the landed state retracts its wings, so the raised platform allows the Sabre to reduce its width before being lowered into the hangar. When landing on the hangar platform, you can expect that you will need to match the Polaris velocity and bearing, as similar to how real-life mid-air refueling works on planes. It is a risky maneuver. You should generally expect good communication between the fighter pilot and the Polaris crew for a smooth procedure. Or the safer option would be to either slow down or stop the Polaris. It will indeed be possible to take off while the Polaris is moving, and this is again done at the fighter pilot's own risk. Right guys, that was the Q&A from the RSI website on the Polaris Part 1. Thank you for watching. I do have the flu at the minute, so I apologize for my slurred speech and mistakes here and there. But yeah, it looks like the Polaris is coming along nicely. It's going to be a real nice ship to have in the verse. Personally, I am really looking forward to it. So yeah, I will catch you all in the verse later. As always, fly safe, Commanders.